A flurry of new documents dropped in the Idaho 4 case reveal shocking details. Amazon records reveal that suspect Bryan Kohberger purchases a K-bar knife, sheath and sharpener back in March of 2022, just 3 months before the WSU criminology student moved to Pullman, Washington from Pennsylvania. Kohberger's defense team is working overtime to suppress this Amazon evidence, stating that Kohberger used a family account to make the purchase, and that it may have been someone besides Kohberger who actually purchased the knife. Prosecutors also revealed a second search for a second K-bar and sheath after the crimes were committed. Defense attorneys argue this search was based on AI algorithms and suggestions used by Amazon to boost sales. Was Kohberger looking for a replacement for the weapon he allegedly used, or was it simply AI-driven since he had purchased one previously? That will be one of the questions we may get an answer to in the upcoming motion hearing on April 9th. In other shocking revelations, Kohberger was not the prime suspect in the beginning. While that person is not named, it is clear that law enforcement were looking into 2 other males when testing and comparing unknown DNA found on fingernail clippings belonging to victim Maddie Mogan. In addition to this DNA present at the scene, at least 2 to 3 other unidentified DNA samples were found inside the house, on a stairwell railing, and on a disposable glove. To date, the prosecution has not given an explanation as to why none of this other DNA was given the same amount of attention as Kohberger's and tested via IgG. Defense attorneys and the prosecution seem to be in some sort of stalemate agreement about the use of the IgG at trial, stating that they do not plan on using the IgG at all. This will likely lead to further questions about how Kohberger was identified. The prosecution wants to say they received a tip, but not mention who or where the tip came from. The defense doesn't want the DNA mentioned at all. This will likely lead to another contentious showdown in the next motion hearing. The question remains, how do you use DNA as evidence if you cannot name the sources you used to identify it? From all the information we have, the DNA is what led law enforcement to Bryan Kohberger. With what appear to be grainy videos and still shots of a white sedan cruising the neighborhood around the time of the crime, and questionable cellular data for Kohberger's phone, it could have taken years for law enforcement to get to Kohberger, if in fact they ever did. Earlier this week came the release of the much-anticipated 911 call by the roommates the morning of the 13th. Except it wasn't morning, it was around noon. The fear and heartbreak in Bethany Funk's voice heard in the call is somewhat overshadowed by the shocking revelations that surviving roommates Bethany and Dylan Mortensen were texting back and forth in the hours after the attack, as well as the next morning. There were multiple Snapchats, photographs taken, text and phone calls to family and friends, as well as Instagram stories, all done before 911 was ever called. These actions taken by the roommates may well be taken as suspicious to a jury at trial, due to the fact that Dylan was so scared after seeing a masked man in the house, she ran down to Bethany's room in fear to hide out. With Kaylee's dog Murphy reportedly barking for a full 20 minutes after 4:17 a.m., the girls had to have some idea there was something very, very wrong. Why friends or 911 were not called closer to 4 a.m. may be a mystery we will never solve. Just like Kohberger is attempting to use his OCD diagnosis to explain away his alleged obsessive cleaning, glove-wearing, and frequent changing of shower curtains, the roommates seem to be relying on youth and innocence, as well as inebriation, to shoo away any concerns over their lack of actions. The phone activity of Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funke may render their testimonies utterly useless. Dylan claimed to be woken from a sound sleep at 4 a.m., yet she had just added a new contact into her phone at 3:51 a.m. She spent 2 hours the next morning on Instagram and various other social media platforms. With this whirlwind of new information coming to light in recent days, the upcoming trial and pretrial hearings are bound to be fraught with questions, controversy, speculation, and accusations from both sides of the aisle. Defense attorney Ann Taylor recently ended her alternate perpetrator filing with the clear yet eerie statement that the state chose to focus on Mr. Kohberger at its own peril.